Hello and welcome to the Business of Blockchain. I'm Jane King. Today we're talking about automobile titles on the blockchain. Champ Titles has built what it believes to be the largest deployment of blockchain for the U.S. government to date. And today we're joined by Shane Bigelow, CEO and co-founder. And thank you so much for joining us and being a sponsor of the Business of Blockchain.
Well, thanks for having me, Jane. Appreciate it.
And love to hear this story. We're talking about automobile titles. They've long been a painful process for people. Explain what you're doing in the blockchain and what parties are involved and how this all works.
Sure, of course. So DMVs have long been plagued by slow lines and difficult experiences for consumers, but it's not the DMV professionals' fault. Oftentimes they don't have the right system of record that can move at the pace of business. If you want to transact your title or move your title to somebody else, if you're a car dealer or a fleet operator or an insurance carrier or a lender, that's often very cumbersome, often very paper-based. We seek to replace those systems in states and work with states to partner to bring that type of technology to their constituents, those car dealers, fleet operators, insurance carriers, lenders, and of course the consumers. And blockchain sits as the system of record behind it to store and track the data.
Explain a little bit how that works, because I find people still don't quite understand blockchain. So how does this work? How does this help the end user?
Sure, so blockchain is just a part of the solution. What really affects the outcome for the users, so those dealers, those fleet operators, insurance carriers, lenders, consumers, is the pace at which they can move their asset from one entity to another, from one person to another, from a dealer to a consumer, from a consumer to a dealer, the pace at which a lender can put a lien onto a title. Take an example. Many states often take 6 to 9 weeks for a lender to be able to perfect their interest on a car loan. Well, this is a problem. They've extended a loan to a consumer, and there's a period of time where that bank doesn't actually have a perfected interest on that loan. It's not really fair. It drives up borrowing costs. Okay. It's similar in the insurance world. They have to wait 60 days to take title to an asset that is involved in a total loss. Insurance carriers can't even go and assert the things they need to do for subrogation on a claim, which is the effort to go and get money from the contra insurance carrier. They're not allowed to do that until the title is in their name. This costs hundreds of millions of dollars per carrier per year simply waiting on the title. That savings inevitably gets passed on to consumers in the form of reduced premium. At a time when premiums are rising, we should want this, by the way, but it gets passed through in the form of reduced premium because carriers don't need to save that money. They want to pass it through to be more competitive. So carriers that are adopting this inevitably see savings.
So, and 30 million people, I understand, are using blockchain without even knowing it. So how is that happening?
Well, thank you. That is the number that'll be live at the end of the year, so to be fair. But yes, so we partner with government in order to replace those systems of record and build them a better way for their constituents to be able to use and communicate with the state the technology that is necessary to move from the paper world to the digital world. So knowing what the technology is behind it is not as relevant as is the process better. It's kind of like a cell phone. Ask most people how a phone call actually works. They don't really know the inner workings of how I could call you from here to there and that would communicate. What matters is that it works. And that's the benefit of the technology we've built, is that it works really, really well. And now it's been tested millions and millions of times. And we're delighted to bring this to different states around the country.
Yeah, how many states are using this now?
There's 4 that are with us, West Virginia, Kentucky, Illinois, and New Jersey.
So tell us about West Virginia. What results are they seeing? How's this working in that state?
Yeah, West Virginia has been a wonderful partner. They were our first client, and really a great forward-looking state. And I don't think most people assign that sort of point of view to West Virginia, but the reality is they're really at the cutting edge of a lot of great innovation that they're bringing to their consumers. So as an example, it used to take 45 days to process the title in West Virginia. So the dealer would buy a car and that car would sit and be unable to be sold for 45 days. A carrier would have a total loss. They'd be unable to recycle that car for 45 days. A lender would be unable to get a lien perfected for 45 days. We now do it in 0.52 days. It's nearly real time. And the benefit of that flows through to the consumers and flows through to all the businesses that are using the system.
Just makes everything more efficient.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I've heard that about West Virginia. They're doing some innovative things in energy too.
They are.
So really interesting what's going on there. So at the moment, your business is focused on serving government agencies. You have a pay for performance model?
Yes.
Explain how that works.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that the problem in many government contracts is that the vendor is paid up front. They're paid simply to show up, and then they, over a very long period of time, deploy something that often is 40–50% as effective as what they committed to up front. So our commitment to government is that unless the user behavior changes, unless users go from the paper world to the digital world, we shouldn't get a transaction fee for that. In fact, the users of the system should be the only ones that pay for it. Think about your normal upfront government vendor who charges the state upfront. If in our world, if you were a set of grandparents, you grew up in Indiana, if you were a set of grandparents in West Lafayette, Indiana, and you didn't buy a car for 10 years, but the state of Indiana decided to deploy a new system and pay $80 million for it up front, that set of grandparents is paying for some portion of that system, even though they've never used it. That's not fair. The right way to do it is to charge the users a transaction fee along the way that incidentally only gets paid if the system works. And that's our commitment back to states. And I believe in government in general, if more contractors were forced to do that or offered to do it, we'd actually have a much lower debt rate and deficit in this country.
Yeah, interesting. I was going to say, how revolutionary,
right.
Like in government to see that. So your blockchain-based system reduces time, costs involved in these title transactions. There's transparency as well, I assume, with the blockchain. So, and it also helps the environment? How's
yes.
that?
Well, so the key to moving from a paper to a digital world is being able to give the users something in exchange for that transition. What they're given is speed. So let's take, for example, the first easy low-hanging fruit is the reduction in paper. An average state will reduce their paper usage by 15 million sheets of paper a year. This is a profound change to the consumption of trees and pulp and other things that go into paper production. But perhaps more interesting than that is take the insurance use case. When there's a set of total losses, let's say there was a hurricane that came through and destroyed a couple 100,000 vehicles, it's no fault of the carrier and no fault of the salvage operator and no fault of the consumer, but those vehicles, when they're recovered, will often sit in salvage yards for 60 days simply waiting on the title to move from the policyholder to the insurance carrier. Meanwhile, they're inevitably doing damage to the world. What we can do is work with all of those partners, and those partners are actively working to help improve the environment through the faster movement of the title. If the title moves faster, that car could sit there for half a day. And isn't that just better for everybody? And so there's so many knock-on effects that you wouldn't believe would come simply from replacing something that no one really thinks about, which is the title and registration system in the state. But the reality is all those knock-on effects, whether it be the environment, the reduction in interest rates because lenders get their perfected interest, the reduction in insurance costs, all of that passes through to the consumer.
Yeah. Are you using artificial intelligence at all?
Yes, we do use AI to help decision the title applications as they come in. It's an assistive force to enable the clerks in different states to be able to process more faster.
And how much adoption are you expecting or hoping for?
Well, generally when we move into a state and take over these transactions, the adoption rate is well north of 95%.
And then can consumers look forward to quick and easy processes with these title transactions?
Yes. So what we're doing is building the guts of the way that other entities might build on top of what we're doing. The analogy I think of is you can't have your iPhone and do all the things you do with it unless Cisco put the routers and switches in place to build out the internet. We're building that so that other companies can come on top of it and make great solutions that consumers can use to drive commerce between themselves, to do private auto sales and things that are more difficult, paper-based and complex today. If the guts are right, the same way that Cisco built out the internet, if the guts are right, everything else will build on top of it and work better.
And what about electric vehicles? There's a big push for that. Will that impact what you do at all? And even, self-driving cars. Does any of that fit into kind of your long-term plans?
It does, and here's sort of the forward-looking view of where this might head. So we've got two issues in this country with EVs. The first is that the utilization of EVs causes a reduction in the tax that's collected for the gas tax. They're not using gas, there's no gas tax collected. The gas tax is the primary way we fund the development of our roads and bridges and tunnels and other things that we need for infrastructure. If we take that gas tax away, you have to apply a different tax. Perhaps it's a mileage tax. That seems fairly logical. If there's a mileage tax, as a consumer, if you're using a vehicle for some portion of time, how is the government going to audit whether or not those miles are assigned to you or someone else? If you're in a taxi or an Uber, or take it even more forward, a self-driving car, how do you have an immutable record that can be audited, that you can rely on and know that the cryptography attached to it is secure enough that you as a consumer feel that your data is protected? You need something like a blockchain-based system to do that.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Thank you so much, Shane, for coming in and explaining all this, and congratulations as well.
Well, thanks, Jane. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks. And that is it for today's edition of the Business of Blockchain. I'm Jane King at the NASDAQ Market Site.